Hi everyone, how are you doing today? Hope your new year is off to a great start. Mine has been quite an exhausting week, but I have some reading updates to share with you. First off, The Woman in White. As I mentioned in a previous video, I picked this up recently to reread for part of a read-along, and I am almost done with the first part. I've really been trying to focus on that. One of my goals for this year is actually to try not to be reading too many things at once, or if I do, to try to give one of them as much focus as possible. So yes, I've been reading The Woman in White. I last read it, kind of skim read it really, I want to say it could have been 10 years ago by now. It's been quite a long time. I struggle a little more now than I used to with some of these 19th century novels, but I think it's worth the investment for sure. It's got lots of drama and suspense, and I absolutely love the characters. For those of you who don't know, The Woman in White was written by Wilkie Collins, and he was a friend of Charles Dickens. And it follows these two sisters, or rather half-sisters, Marianne Halcombe and Laura Fairley. Laura Fairley has been previously in an arranged engagement to this baronet, and yet she falls in love with her painting instructor. So that's part of it, but there's also this woman in white who the painting instructor Walter Hartwright keeps running into, and she seems to have some mysterious connection to the two sisters and to Laura's betrothed. So that's kind of the premise or the setup of this novel. It's written in first person from different perspectives, which is kind of a fun thing. I'll have more thoughts on this later, but I'm really enjoying it. Some other notes that I took on this, which I wanted to share. Collins really spends his time in each scene. He really isn't very fast-paced in this at all, and I think it could be partly because it was serialized, so there was no rush to move from scene to scene, but I especially notice it here. He spends a lot of time in the narrator's head and focuses on character sketches as opposed to lots of action scenes or whatever, or Dostoevsky focuses a lot on these really big monologues, but you don't see as much of that in here. Yeah, and if for those of you who are writing, and one of the reasons I actually took some notes on this is, one of the things he does here is he doesn't give his side characters very elaborate backstories. He just kind of gives them simple and plausible backstories. So I kind of liked how he was focusing on the things that would really move his story along and not getting sidetracked in things that aren't necessarily needed to give this story a lot of depth and robustness. I don't know, that's just my 2 cents. I like the priority he gives to some of the characters and developing them versus trying to give everyone equal treatment, I guess. Hopefully that makes sense. Another book that I'm reading, this one, is something that my boss gifted me for Christmas. It's called Daily Creative by Todd Henry, a practical guide for staying prolific, brilliant, and healthy. And what this is just a bunch of prompts for each day of the year, related to creativity, related to work, and you could use this if you're like me trying to write your own book. You could use that as sort of a thought question for you to act on. You can use it for your professional life, or if you're into self-improvement, this could possibly be helpful too. I'm now on day, let's see here. I'm now on day 7, I think, because I'm only doing it on the weekdays and I wanted to get ahead. But yes, I'm liking it so far. It's interesting. Some of these questions I've already thought about, but I suspect, with 365 of them, there'll be plenty more I haven't covered yet. Instantly, I have this promotional bookmark from the Emma movie that came out a couple years ago. I just grabbed a bookmark for this, but anyway, Daily Creative, would recommend it so far. The next two books I'm going to talk about are actually ebooks, and I don't have a great cover for the first one, so I'll just throw it up on the screen. It is The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers, I think is his name. I believe he's a precursor to Lovecraft. And I heard about this one on Marianne Guevara's channel, which I'll link to in the description. The King in Yellow, I just read the first 4 short stories in a collection that had those. Actually, technically the Project Gutenberg ebook has a lot more stories, but the first 4 are the ones that really pertain to this King in Yellow character. And what it is 4 mysterious, weird stories in the style of Lovecraft, sort of. Although, like, there's no Cthulhu creatures, but they're mysterious, weird stories, and they all relate to characters who have read this play called The King in Yellow, and whoever reads the play is said to go insane. So that's the idea, but the stories are pretty loosely connected otherwise. Like the first one's very dystopian. It was actually my favorite of the stories. And mind you, there are quite a few outdated and in some cases racist things in these stories, as with Lovecraft. So just be aware of that. But in terms of the plot and the weird elements, I thought the first story was pretty interesting. It kind of takes place in this futuristic dystopian society, presumably an American city, I think. And this character, at first you think he's just got some jealousy issues with his cousin and just not fitting into society, but then as it goes on, he starts making these really off color comments, and just it really builds up to quite a dramatic finale, and a bit unsettling. The other stories were also unsettling in different ways, but I still feel like the first one had the most promise in it. Overall, I mean, like Lovecraft, I didn't really connect so much with The King in Yellow. I don't know, I'm very fond of the stories that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote outside of Sherlock Holmes, which are weird stories, like The Captain of the Pole Star is one collection. Round the Red Lamp is an excellent collection. It's kind of medically themed. I guess I'm just very used to his style of macabre stories. So, I don't know. I think I'm always comparing people to him, and I just didn't feel like this series quite measured up. But, I mean, don't take my word for it. I still recommend trying it if you're into that stuff, and it was an enjoyable way to spend an evening. Let me see about some quotes here. Honestly, okay, there were 2 quotes that I kind of liked here. They're talking about this book, The King in Yellow, or the play, rather, The King in Yellow, and the narrator says it is a book of great truths. And this other character replies, "Yes, of truths which send men frantic and blast their lives. I don't care if the thing is, as they say, the very supreme essence of art. It's a crime to have written it, and I, for one, shall never open its pages." Now that's kind of an interesting thought, I think, just outside of this story. Like, could there be something so terrible that somebody wrote that it's not even worth reading or having in publication? And obviously, you know, with the history of banned books and stuff, there have been things like that people thought were just too terrible to even circulate. And, you know, I don't know what my opinion is on that. I think it's a very interesting idea, though. I'm more inclined to just say, you know what, people got to take responsibility for what they read and what they take from it. All right, so another book that I started last night and could hardly put down is one that's been on my to-read shelf for quite some time, and it's called Letters to Felice by Franz Kafka. And it's got that by now very signature eyeball cover design that some of his editions have now. But Letters to Felice, so that was his multiple time fiance. They have quite an interesting story about how they met and their relationship, if you can call it that, because from what I understand, a lot of it was like a long distance relationship, and they were just writing a lot, and he didn't feel like he could commit to her, which, not for, well, he was a bit of a ladies' man, but it was more to do with the conflict he felt between her and his writing. Not that she didn't, support him, but he felt this extreme draw towards writing that he didn't feel was compatible with being a married man and so on, which is an interesting thing if you want to compare it to Kierkegaard, because he also actually broke off his engagement to his fiancée because of his writing. Granted, Kafka comes quite a bit after Kierkegaard. They're not contemporaries by any means, but the fact they both had this almost religious devotion to their writing, almost as if they were monks or something, is kind of interesting. When you read him, you'll definitely get flashbacks to Kierkegaard if you're aware of that whole drama that he had. And the other thing I'm enjoying, or have enjoyed, about this book is it starts off with this essay by Eric Heller. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. It's called Kafka's True Will, and he's talking about the whole controversy about publishing Kafka's writings, because supposedly Kafka told his friend Max Brod to burn everything after he passed away, and Max told him he would never do that, and sure enough, Max did not do that. In fact, I believe everything that has been found of Kafka's has been published or in the process of being published. It's an interesting dilemma. Personally, I would say if it's been published and it's been this long, I don't have any qualms about reading it. Although it does beg the question, what about contemporary authors? People that maybe just passed away very recently. We could talk about Harper Lee. That's a whole thing, a whole video we could do. But I just want to say that this essay at the beginning of Letters to Felice is worth reading on its own for that reason, because it illuminated to me some of the points of nuance and detail about Kafka's instructions to Max. For example, this written command not to publish any of his stuff or to destroy it was written in ink on an undated piece of paper. So it wasn't even like a super formal, legal, drawn up will. It was pretty casual in terms of a will. And the essayist here, talks about things Kafka wasn't so keen on publishing and ended up publishing himself. But the big theme really is his love-hate relationship with writing itself, and the feeling that Kafka had that writing in him, writing was his identity in a way, but it was an identity that he had this very conflicted feeling with. He found his existence in it, and yet, he also, sometimes he just felt this, discomfort with it. I'm not expressing it very eloquently, so again, recommend reading the essay if nothing else. The actual letters are quite entertaining. He met Felice somewhat by accident at his friend Max's house, and it took him 2 months, but he finally worked up the courage to write to her on his company's letterhead paper. He worked for the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute. If you're interested, by the way, on how he got, I believe it was that job, there's a book called Is That Kafka? 99 Fines, I think that's the title, and it talks about how Kafka had to, how the way he was able to get that job in spite of extreme prejudice against Jewish people having the kind of job he was able to get. But long tangent there. What I mean is these letters are quite amusing and awkward and a little bit creepy in the sense that he kind of goes on and on about various things. But yeah, I'm finding them very entertaining. And even though this is quite a long book, I believe it's something like 500 letters. And by the way, Felice gave them to the publishers to publish. She gave her approval of the publication of these. So, but yeah, in spite of its length, in spite of the the sometimes cringiness of Kafka, it's quite an entertaining read, and I'm enjoying it. I mean, you kind of have to be a fan of Kafka to want to read something like this, but If you like old-timey letters and if you like Kafka, might be a fun read. I almost forgot to mention, I'm still reading Dune. I just started the next part, and there will be an update from me and Nigel soon on that, hopefully in the next week or two. And I think I'll be starting Christine Lovren's Daughter this weekend. But generally speaking, one of my goals is to try to focus on one thing at a time, even if I'm reading multiple books at a time. It's the switching back and forth that can be quite difficult. So, yeah, I still like to read multiple books at a time, but just really trying to hopefully even finish The Woman in White sooner rather than later is going to be helpful. And as far as my Goodreads challenge goes, I decided to go for 40 books this year, kind of taking the average of the last 5 or 6 years, excluding 2022, because that was a year I was just exceptionally busy. But the other ones averaged out to about 40 books, and I think that's a pretty realistic goal if we're thinking like 3 books a month, with a few of them being like super short. Like The King in Yellow was pretty short. So yeah, that's my Goodreads challenge. Let me know if you're doing the Goodreads challenge, whatever your goals are for this year. Yeah, I'm really feeling pretty good about it, but it's only the first week, so I don't want to get too overconfident. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.